Julie, thank you for coming in the studio. It is good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Julie Gunlock from the Independent Women's Forum, of course, and the Bespoke Parenting Hour podcast, which I think we're going to be back on schedule, right? I think we're doing one tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We'll have nothing to talk about.
No, we've got stuff to talk about. In fact, I'm saving stuff,
Good.
actually, specifically. I'm not talking about it with you today so that we can talk about it tomorrow.
Good.
But thankfully, we have a lot of other stuff to talk about in the meantime, including, now, this is one of your pet peeves. It's one of your issues here, right, is the culture of alarmism and the idea that we should be scared about basically everything. It just depends on what message you're getting as to what you specifically should be scared of at that time.
Right.
And in that vein, you have a piece at Acculturated on the New York State PTA and their latest move into the realm of school lunches. What are they doing?
Yeah, so the New York State PTA has proposed a resolution to remove all GMO ingredients or GM ingredients, genetically modified ingredients, from school lunches. I mean, this is the kind of privileged, entitled idea that comes from wealthy PTA moms to make it more difficult for people of all economic levels. And it's just frustrating to me to see this when the science is very strong on GMO's side. I know that I talk about this a lot, but I really think people need to be reassured about GMOs. And when you see these kinds of actions by the PTA, I mean, let's be clear, okay? The FDA, the USDA, the American Medical Association, every single academic and scientific organization in Europe and in England, in New Zealand, in Australia, I can list, there are dozens of organizations that have confirmed the safety of GMOs. I mean, filled with academics and scientists. I mean, I know this doesn't match the heft of the PTA, the geniuses at the National PTA, but it really is frustrating to me when the science, the weight of scientific evidence shows that GMOs are completely safe. And then you have organizations like this doing political stuff and scaring moms, again, about GMOs. So I wrote a piece, again, for Acculturated, talking about how, again, this is usually, most of the moms that are involved in the PTA, I am involved in the PTA. I'm very actually involved in my local PTA. Most of them are, a little bit more well off. They can shop for boutique food items, and it just frustrates me to see this kind of alarmism from an organization that has no scientific credentials making decisions like this when it's not necessary.
So what's the harm? Because you do get into this in your piece at Acculturated, but I can see people say, well, so what's the big deal?
Right, who cares?
It's a label, right?
Right.
Who cares? Let them have no GMO food.
Well, I'll tell you.
I'll
tell you what the big deal is. 90%, I think it's more like 87% of processed foods contain GMOs. Now, I know it's a big boogie word, right? It's a bad word to say processed food, but I mean, there's an awful lot of processed food that's perfectly healthy, like like low-fat crackers or goldfish crackers or things that show up, like hot dog buns. Okay, so if we're going to take GMOs, actually, I take that back. There are no such things as GMOs in hot dog buns because there's no GMO wheat. But tortilla chips, okay, or many of the sort of snacks and items you see in school lunches might contain one or two GMO products. Soy is a big GMO crop that's grown in the U.S., and that makes canola oil. So if the food is fried or contains any canola or any canola oil, which is in a lot of processed food, if any corn is in any of these products that are sold in schools, if this ban goes through, you got to take them out. Now, there is non-GMO food, but it's much more expensive. It's like organic food. It's that kind of price point. So it's gonna be more expensive for school lunches, which are already wasteful. But also it sends a message to moms out there of all economic levels that GMO food isn't, which again is in processed food, isn't safe. That's not a fair message to send to these moms.
No, it's not, and yet it's the message that is being sent. what's so frustrating about this is ultimately this is a matter of dollars and cents, at least for these schools, right? But they're now going to pass these costs on, I suppose, to the parents. And there is that sort of cultural push, as you say, that the parents also have to adopt this dietary lifestyle in their homes as well, right? Because God forbid you want these schools feeding your kids better than you do. It's always been a fairly low bar. We've always been able to beat the school cafeteria in terms of feeding our kids better tasting food, and not to mention healthier food. Do you remember that? Did you have that like neon yellow gravy over turkey when you were growing up? Yeah. Oh, never been able to replicate that.
Well, I say in my piece, what do you think this is going to end? It's going now that the next thing is they're going to insist it all be organic food, and then it all be Bell and Evans $40 chickens. I mean, where does this end? I mean, I think people of our generation. Look, I grew up. Okay, my mother made my lunches a lot, but then I got to a point where I didn't want her to make my lunch, and I lived on those off-brand cheese curls and those disgusting fried sandwich things. Okay. I survived, okay? And most people do. And just the idea that we are making food in school lunch, these school lunch foods much, more sort of fancy and expensive. The school lunch program's a mess. It's already wasteful, and it's taxpayer dollars. Don't forget, you pay for this. So, we need to be sure that we're not raising costs unnecessarily.
And maybe take a look at who's benefiting when we do raise these costs unnecessarily.
Right.
All right, so there's also a piece, I saw this at the Charlotte Observer. You had Lenore Skenazy at your panel event last week. Hope it went well.
It did.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And this I found at Lenore's website, Free Range Kids. From the Charlotte Observer, a free preschool for low-income children recently hit the jackpot when a donor gave the nonprofit badly needed playground equipment for a new location in East Charlotte. But nearly a month after the start of fall classes, the equipment continues to remain untouched outside of the Learning Collaborative, and it will stay off limits for the foreseeable future, say school officials. Shannon McKnight, Director of Development for the Learning Collaborative, says the kids can't play on it. It's a safety issue. It's required that you have a safety barrier surrounding anything that's a playground, which we can't afford yet. The safety barrier, by the way, is not like a fence around the playground.
Yeah.
It's underneath it. 6 inches of a special mulch is needed under the playground equipment, about 25 cubic feet. That's about $1,100, and the school doesn't have the money. So now they've got this new playground that the kids have to look at every day and are told that they can't play on it because they don't have the mulch. Now, I imagine after this story was published, some enterprising landscaping business said, you know what, I got you. We'll bring the mulch out this afternoon so that the kids can play.
Right.
Julie, did your local playground have 6 inches of mulch
I believe it.
on it when you were growing up?
It probably had concrete. I mean,
I distinctly remember Oklahoma soil in August is about the consistency of concrete. It's red concrete. It's got cracks in it.
Yep.
Occasionally there are tufts of grass. There are a lot of red ants that will bite you. And that was my experience with the childhood playground. And again, I don't have...
Yeah, brain damage.
Not only did I survive, I don't have any bad memories of the playground.
Right. Well, ours was, I do remember Lincoln Park Elementary. It was one of those wooden structures that had absolutely no safety rails. I mean, it would, it was one of these things where the little path would go, you'd be really high up, like 20 feet up or something. And it would just end. There was no railing. It would just end. It was a straight drop down. All of these really cool wooden structures have now disappeared. We recently found one in Illinois when we were visiting my parents. And I was so excited. And it really scared the kids, but they managed. They were fine. They figured out what they could do, what they felt comfortable doing. They took some risks. It was great. But I mean, I like a study on the psychological damage you do to kids by showing them something really fun and then telling them they can't touch it, right? I mean, these poor kids, there's going to be all sorts of problems for these kids. They're going to grow up. They're not going to know what was the root of their angst and anger, but it's all going to come back to this getting this playground equipment and not being able to touch it. I mean, this is the kind of unreasonable stuff. We wonder, I've talked for years about childhood obesity and the things that contribute to it. I mean, that's right. Let's keep them inside. Hey, why don't we give them a tablet or an iPhone to play with, and they don't run around, and they don't get exercise. They don't enjoy the outdoors. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense. There's other very interesting sort of studies on how playground equipment is now made so safe that kids aren't interested. I've talked about that on this show, how my kids don't care about the playground equipment at their school. They go out and climb the trees. So, this is nothing new. Molly coddling these kids, wrapping them in cotton wool and making sure they never hurt themselves. I mean, ultimately really harms kids. And I think there's a lot of evidence that that's true.
Talking again with Julie Gunlock of the Independent Women's Forum. We're going to touch on this tomorrow in the Bespoke Parenting podcast, which will be up later in the week, because there was a story, I think it was in the New York Times, about a Silicon Valley dad who has turned his backyard into what he calls a playborhood. Because, of course, I don't like the name Playborhood, but whatever. He's got the trampoline. Sounds great. Lets his kids play on the roof. Very, very Silicon Valley libertarian.
Yeah.
And the article is written from the point of view of a mom also in the neighborhood who hates this. And it's sort of we do see, I think, a lot of attaboys for free-range parents, at least at places like Acculturated, Julie. So it was really interesting to see this article that was very much free-range parents need to shut up and they need to, bring their kids in off of the roof because you're dangerous and you're making life more difficult for the rest of us. It was a very interesting perspective from a helicopter parent.
Yeah.
So I want to get into that tomorrow.
Okay, great. Well, it is really, I got sent that article about 50 times. People kept thinking I was missing it. That's okay. But definitely want to get into that. And I think it really is kind of an interesting, I try to be sympathetic to all parents and parents of different styles. And I wrote in my op-ed about reasonable parents that reasonable parents do not ascribe to one parenting style or the other. They tend to borrow from one or the other, or maybe they feel comfortable free-ranging in one area but not in the other, and they're more protective in this particular activity. I have to say, even at my own event, which was on Capitol Hill, in a townhouse, in this really beautiful townhouse, I let my kids come. My husband and my kids came to the event, and just to give you an example of my husband knows that I am a devotee of the free range. I try as much as possible to be free range. But, it was very busy in there. There were lots of people. And I look over and my husband is saying that the kids can't wander around, or go outside. And I went up to him and I said, look, we're at a free range event. You've got to you got to let the kids go explore. And he sort of came to and realized, I should do this. So, I think even in families where you're committed and you really try hard, there are times where you feel nervous. And so I think in general I try to encourage people to have sympathy for those people who may not follow your parenting style, and understand that people have worries that others don't. So we should all just try to be a little kinder on these issues.
Talking again with Julie Gunlock of the Independent Women's Forum. That would also apply to FBI agents, perhaps, too. That advice would apply to.
Heck no.
FBI agents who might run into no.
No, I don't mean. No, I'm doing the opposite. I'm saying don't scold people or give your opinion.
No, that's, I know. Yes, that's where I was going with that. That perhaps that gentleman who talked with you in the grocery store parking lot, perhaps he should have taken that advice.
Yes, I thought you were going to say you're on his side. We were going to have. No. Of course not. No. Yeah. It's like, where's this going? What happened to you? Exactly.
No.
That's exactly.
But I will say this: at the end of the day, you as parents, I think know what's best in your situation, and you're not parenting to please Lenore Skenazy. You're not parenting to please Julie Gunlock or Cam Edwards or the helicopter parent, right? And so you're right. Sometimes you do find those scenarios where you're like, I got to rein this in. Or those scenarios where you end up pushing yourself and say, you know what, it's actually better if I let my kids have that freedom. Again, parenting is not a one-size-fits-all proposition.
Right.
Every family is different because every kid is different. As a father of 5, I know this. Every kid is different. And so the idea that, you can have a parenting philosophy that applies in all these situations, I don't know. Sometimes I think you just have to wing it, Julie.
You have to trust your instincts. You have to trust your instincts. I mean, I really think that is what's lost in all of this. When we are told that, even Lenore, I mean, she's a parent, she's a parenting expert, and but she wouldn't want you to, go against your instincts because you're trying to be so loyal to a particular parenting theory. She would want you to do what's best for your kids based on how they were raised and even how you were raised. And so, again, I think most people that I really respect on parenting issues never lose sight that instincts are really important in parenting. People really pretty much know how to do it. It comes kind of naturally. And I think we're losing that in our culture now with the culture of alarmism and the culture of, everyone's an expert. Everyone knows better than everyone else. Scientists don't matter. Doctors don't matter. People who study these issues don't matter. I'm the expert. I mean, I know that kind of goes contrary. I'm saying trust your instincts, but I think it's really important that you not lose sight of your own opinions on these things.
Well, that's the thing. I think you have to, you might have to burrow down to actually figure out what your instincts are versus what the societal peer pressure is to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes your instincts actually, kind of lie beneath that. They're buried underneath that expectation of what it is that you should do. All right, listen, Julie, we got to run, unfortunately, but thank you very much for coming on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
I will talk with you tomorrow.
Okay, good. Thanks.
All right, make sure you follow Julie. You can read everything she's writing at iwf.org. We'll talk with Julie Gunlock very soon here on Cam & Company.